All right, so we looked at the gross anatomy of the kidney. I'm sorry, I stopped it for a minute thinking like, oh, maybe I should go back over this again, but no. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the functional units of the kidney, and these are the nephrons, okay? So the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney because it does the functions of what the kidney is supposed to do. Remember how the kidney's job is to filter blood, remove waste, and create urine. So we need something in order to bring blood in and basically remove substances from blood that we want to excrete or remove from our body. So that means we're going to need small microscopic structures to do that. So I'm going to draw two different types of nephrons. One nephron is going to be a cortical nephron, and the other is a juxtamedullary nephron. Okay. So I created this chart here for you guys to fill out. Like maybe like move my picture a little bit for a minute if you need to take a screenshot of that. But it will also be on Canvas too. Okay. I'm not going to fill out this chart. I'm going to let you guys fill out this chart. There might not be like all these things that you can fill out. I just created a whole bunch of lines essentially. But you want to think about that as you draw a cortical nephron and as you draw a juxtamedullary nephron, what are some things that are same and what are some things that are different? Okay. So I drew this like pyramid because I want you to understand where parts of the nephron are going to be located in the greater structure of the kidney, so in the layers of the kidney. So we're going to see that this layer up above is the renal cortex. Okay, and then this layer below, basically this is the renal pyramid. And then the space between is the renal cortex. So essentially what that means is together, remember, that means this is the renal medulla. Okay. So I want you to think about that. And then I might actually use this again for blood vessels. Excuse me. We'll see how it goes. Okay. I kind of made some of these things really quickly because you guys were asking for videos and I just have not a whole lot of time in my life right now. So let's do the cortical nephron first. Okay, so the nephron is going to be composed of essentially two things and attached to a collecting duct. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by drawing a collecting duct right here in the middle. Maybe that will help us a little bit. Okay. What you're going to see is that a cortical nephron should be primarily found in the cortex. So the two parts of the nephron are going to be the renal corpuscle and then the renal tubule. The renal corpuscle is basically kind of like a little ball that's going to include blood vessels. And then coming off that ball is going to be a really windy tube called the proximal convoluted tubule. It's going to dip a little bit into the renal pyramid here, and then it comes back up and winds until it hits the collecting duct. Okay, so our tube should kind of go like that. And technically, this is a simplified version of a nephron. I should probably really make it much more complicated. So there's that one. But essentially, what it would really look like is that your renal corpuscle is probably more like right about there-ish. So you have like a renal corpuscle, maybe right about there. You'll have a proximal convoluted tubule again. It's still going to dip just a little bit here into the renal medulla or into the pyramid, and then it travels back up like that and hits the collecting duct. Okay, so just keep drawing your really convoluted tubule, your nephron loop, and then come back up like that. So if we're going to label these things, this whole thing is called the renal corpuscle. Okay. The renal corpuscle includes two things, which I'm going to draw over here, but I'm going to draw it in the opposite way because I always draw it in the opposite way. So I don't know if I don't know if I could draw it the other way. But essentially, you want to kind of draw like a half circle like that with a tube coming off of it, okay? Normally, I draw this on the whiteboard. It's so much better. And then you're going to draw like a set of cells that kind of go around like this until you get to that tube, okay? So then you have cells along this tube. And we're just going to take our red and we're going to have a set of blood vessels that lead into this tube and wind in and then lead out. Okay, so the renal corpuscle is actually going to be comprised of two things. The first thing, that's the round epithelial portion that goes on the outside, this is called the glomerular capsule or the Bowman's capsule. The glomerular capsule actually has two parts. One is a parietal layer, and that's the outermost layer, and the other one is a visceral layer. The visceral layer actually is a layer that goes around the blood vessel right here. I was going to try to make it a little bit thicker, but I can't do that. So that layer is actually a layer of cells, and those are called podocytes. Okay. The podocytes surround the red thing. So the red thing is the other part of the renal corpuscle. That's the second part of the renal corpuscle. This is called the glomerulus. The glomerulus is a fenestrated capillary, meaning it has holes in it. And so the podocytes plus the glomerulus make up the filtration membrane of the nephron. It's where we're going to filter blood and create the filtrate, okay? The blood vessel that's much larger that brings blood into the glomerulus, this is called the afferent or afferent arteriole. I usually try to pronounce the A really apparently because the other one is called efferent, so they sound exactly the same. So that's why I just say afferent and efferent. Just so you guys hear the difference between what I'm saying. So blood enters the glomerulus, you filter that, and then blood exits out of the efferent arteriole. The efferent arteriole should be a little bit smaller, okay? So sometimes on the models that we have in class, the afferent arteriole looks thicker. The efferent arteriole looks thinner. So pay attention to that difference. The afferent arteriole has a little bit more of a muscle layer so that you can control blood flow into the glomerulus. Okay. And then what you should see is the next part is called the renal tubule. So all that's the renal tubule. I'm just going to forego actually writing renal tubule. So you can think the renal corpuscle is made up of the glomerular capsule and then the glomerulus. Then the tube coming off is the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. Then what we're going to see is we have this loop portion, this U-shaped loop. This is called the nephron loop. The nephron loop actually has multiple parts. So the filtrate is going to travel down, and that's the descending limb. Sorry, I don't have enough room to label that. Then as the filtrate moves up, this is called the ascending limb. Okay. As the ascending limb comes up, you're going to see the next part of the tubule. This is called the distal convoluted tubule. Really should have thought this out. I could have used way more space right there. But that's besides the point because I need to use the other side as well. All right. What you should see is that the part of the ascending limb and where the ascending limb and the distal convoluted tubule come up back into the cortex, you should see how it meets up with the renal corpuscle. So right here, you'll see part of that tube, And this, we're going to call this the distal convoluted tubule right there. Okay. It's a little piece of the ascending limb and a little piece of distal convoluted tubules. It's right where that border is. The reason for that is we need to have what's called a juxtaglomerular complex. So the juxtaglomerular complex includes cells that are in this tubule called the macula densa. So I know in the PowerPoint it says that's in the ascending limb. Yes, it's in the ascending limb, where the ascending limb and the distal convoluted tubule border is. Okay, so I hope that's okay. All right. So that purple is the macula densa. And then around the afferent arteriole, you're going to have more cells. Okay. These are either called juxtaglomerular cells. Yes, juxtaglomerular cells or granular cells. I'm just going to call them granular cells because it's easier to label. Those are all going to be important for how you regulate like blood pressure and glomerular filtration rate. So hopefully that's a nice like little picture to help you understand the juxtaglomerular complex right there. Okay. All nephrons have a juxtaglomerular complex. So that's our cortical nephron, right? So you should see how the cortical nephron is primarily found in the cortex. Then we're going to have a juxtamedullary nephron on the other side. So on the other side, I'm going to draw another ball here. I'm going to have my proximal convoluted tubule. Then my nephron loop has to come really far down, and I'm a little bit too close to the space right there. Hold on, let me make my renal corpuscle a little bit higher. Okay. I'm going to have my proximal convoluted tubule. I have my nephron loop, and then I have my distal convoluted tubule. So what you should see is the collecting duct is where multiple nephrons attach to. Okay, so you can keep drawing your tube. So it comes up like that. So you still have a juxtaglomerular complex. We still have a renal corpuscle. We still have, I'm just going to abbreviate, this is the proximal convoluted tubule. You see the nephron loop here. The nephron loop has, this is the ascending limb. I'm sorry, it's not the ascending limb. Here we have the descending limb. Here we have the ascending limb of the nephron loop. And here's our distal convoluted tubule. So one thing you should notice the difference is the juxtamedullary nephron, which is over here. Sorry about my crazy handwriting. The juxtamedullary nephron, and this is our cortical nephron. So juxtamedullary nephron has a much longer nephron loop, okay? The reason for the much longer nephron loop is it's going to help us create an osmotic gradient or a salt gradient inside of the medulla so that we can concentrate urine using that osmotic/salt gradient, right? We need that really long nephron loop to help us continue to pull stuff from the nephron loop to create that osmotic gradient that's going to be from a low concentration in the cortex to a high concentration towards the bottom of the renal medulla. So you should see how some things are the same and some things are different, okay? So I'm going to probably come back to this picture when I draw some of my blood vessels so you can see some of the other differences. Some of the other differences have to do with the blood vessels that are going to surround the cortical versus the juxtamedullary nephron. One of the other differences is the juxtamedullary nephron make up a smaller percentage of nephrons that are found in the kidney. So I think it's like 15%, whereas like 85% are cortical nephrons. Basically, cortical nephrons are the everyday nephrons that are making not necessarily dilute urine, but they're making the bulk percentage of urine. whereas juxtamedullary nephrons are there to help us create the system to concentrate urine. So we don't want to over salt our kidney, basically. Like the inside part of our kidney is going to be salty. So we don't want too many of those nephrons, okay? So just think about the fact that this is how filtrate is going to be made. So here we have our proximal convoluted tubule. As we filter blood, our filtrate goes down the proximal convoluted tubule, down the descending limb of the nephron loop, up the ascending limb of the nephron loop, through the distal convoluted tubule into the collecting duct, okay? Then urine's going to flow down the collecting duct from multiple nephrons. I said urine, excuse me. The filtrate. The filtrate is going to run down the collecting duct from multiple nephrons. And then we come here. So if this is our collecting ducts, that means we're going to collect urine from all our collecting ducts into the minor calyx. Then it goes to the major calyx. Then it goes to the renal pelvis, down the ureter, okay? That is how urine is going to flow. Remember, you only have filtrate in the renal tubule, okay? You only have filtrate in the renal tubule and in the collecting duct. You don't have urine until it exits out of the collecting duct.